I'll say, hey everybody. I hope you had a nice lunch break. Right now I've got my Thai peanut sauce over noodles and vegetables, which I made on my 2-burner induction range. And it was on a metal platform, like shelving from IKEA, where I used to have my fancy antique gas stove that was poisoning us. So, Brady, I think that your topic is one of the most important. It's so universal that people are being poisoned by their home's gas stoves, and I am very appreciative of you in this presentation, which I've seen, I think, once before, and it's so powerful and effective in the rest of it. So, let me just hand it over to you. I'll stop my video and um, carry on. Thanks for helping us all understand better.
Well, thanks, Sean. Thanks for your support and always being such a great advocate. So as Sean said, my name is Brady Seals. I'm at the Rocky Mountain Institute. I've been here for about 10 months, which has flown by. And before that, I was working internationally on clean cook stoves. So you could say that I am a stover for life. I've been in this field now about 12 years. And to be honest, I really didn't realize until I got to Rocky Mountain Institute how much work we still have to do on clean stoves in this country. And just a couple words on Rocky Mountain Institute. So we are a nonprofit organization that's nearly 40 years old. That's all about the energy transition. So we've grown substantially. I think right now we're hovering around 250 people. I'm on the building electrification team, which is all about decarbonizing buildings. And I specifically lead a work stream on the health and air quality co-benefits of electrification. And we are also growing. I think this is a really hot topic right now. So we are now a staff of about 18 people. So just to kick us off, I wanted to, okay, I've already done the first one, the introduction, and the next couple of points, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how does health fit into zero carbon buildings, and really we'll get into the details of a recent report we published in May, which was all about the gas stove. Since I have your attention, I will take advantage of it and just say a couple words on outdoor building pollution and health impacts, and I will try to leave some time at the end for question and answers. So without further ado, why health? Why building decarbonization and health? And I think right here we see that we know buildings are the largest contributor to climate change, 40%. But it's also our biggest opportunity to directly impact people. So 90% of our time is spent inside buildings. Some of you who have heard me speak before, I apologize that I keep saying the same fact, but it is so shocking to me when I learned that we spend more time inside buildings than some whales spend underwater. So some whales are literally coming up for air more often than we leave our buildings. So we truly are indoor creatures. But there is this co-benefit opportunity that we can also really impact lives and improve our health and comfort and productivity by electrifying buildings and really making buildings work for us. We also believe, and I know Sean is a huge proponent of this, that healthy buildings are just absolutely critical to the just transition of our energy system. We'll talk about this, but there's a lot of environmental justice and equity considerations, particularly when you start looking at the health benefits. So air quality, like I said, I've been working on air quality, household, indoor and outdoor for the last 12 years. And I truly feel that air quality is like this golden braid that weaves together climate and health in a really tangible way that makes it accessible and something that we're primed to address. I think it brings up new opportunities to collaborate. It's a policy driver. We can address emissions at their source. And we also know that building emissions or air pollution, in part by building emissions, is our greatest environmental risk factor for early death. So switching gears a bit, what is one of the top polluting devices in our home? Well, it's the gas stove. And so in May, a few of us teamed up to look at all the literature that was out there and to try to put this information into one report that was packageable and easy to send to our moms and to everyone else. So this is Rocky Mountain Institute, Mothers Out Front, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and Sierra Club. And the report essentially looked at, well, there's about 50 years of scientific health data on gas stove pollution, but we looked at the last 20 years in a deep dive. We synthesized our findings into 8 key buckets. We also really wanted to highlight some case studies of action. Where are the bright spots? And so Canada has been really bullish on their health-based standards for pollutants indoors and outdoors. Of course, California with the all-electric movement. We've seen Massachusetts Medical Society really committing to the issue of gas stove pollution, and that there's a key need to prioritize these environmental justice communities. So the report is about 10 pages of text and about 30 pages of citations. So it is evidence and fact forward. And we really hope that this can be a tool to raise awareness, but also provide really practical recommendations for individuals, policymakers, healthcare professionals, researchers, and funders. So let's get into some of these findings. So I mentioned before, but we spend up to 90% of our time indoors. This was pre-COVID times, pre-stay-at-home order. So that's probably a bit more at this point. And it's ironic because our indoor environments might be the most polluted places that we spend time. The first thing you see on the EPA's website on indoor air pollution is that our indoor spaces are 2 to 5 and as much as 100 times higher indoors than outdoors. And so these are our homes, but also oftentimes our schools, our buildings. So I think when we're talking about this, we're talking about buildings in general. In the home, one of the sources of pollution is the gas stove. And in the 2016 EPA report, the EPA themselves said that homes with gas stoves have 50 to 400% higher nitrogen dioxide emissions than homes with electric stoves. So this is significant. Nitrogen dioxide is a toxic gas, one of the pollutants that we're concerned about because it is invisible, it is odorless, and I sort of think of it as like the forgotten pollutant. We're so often talking about particulate matter and ozone, which are so key, but nitrogen dioxide has many important properties which make it a key pollutant to address at the source that we'll mention. So these indoor nitrogen dioxide emissions, they're invisible. You can't see them, we can't smell them, but just by the act of cooking, we can often reach peak levels inside of our homes that would exceed outdoor standards. So another way to think of this is that these emission levels that have been measured in homes would be illegal if they were found outdoors. So baking a cake in the oven, you can reach a peak parts per billion of 230. And the outdoor standard, the EPA tells us that for 1 hour, it's only safe to be breathing in about 100 parts per billion. And for long-term exposure, so anything 24 hours or greater, that is significantly lower. And it's important to note that anytime we cook, we do release some kinds of pollutants, whether those are volatile organic compounds or particulate matter. We will release pollutants whether we're burning our food or not. But nitrogen dioxide is a little bit unique, and you can see at the bottom here that the gas cooktop with no food or the oven with no food is also reaching very elevated levels. So this is showing us a lot of the pollutants are coming from the flames or the gas fuel itself. And there's a couple populations that are more susceptible to illnesses from air pollution. And the first major population is children. The best data, the best studies that we have are looking at children's exposure to nitrogen dioxide and other pollutants and what that means for health. And there's a couple of key factors. The first is that children breathe more than adults. Almost, they breathe 50% more air than adults do. And they also have greater levels of physical activity, which, if you're home with kids during these times, I'm sure you know. They also have immature respiratory and immune systems. So children's lungs are developing until they're 6 years old or so. So there's a really key time when we want to be sure we're doing everything we can to reduce their exposure to air pollution. So NO2, like I said, again, I think it is an understood pollutant, but we are learning more about the health effects of nitrogen dioxide. And so some of the best literature that we have is from the EPA's latest integrated science assessment, which was published in 2016. It's about 1,000 pages of text. So we saved you the trouble and pulled out some of the different health effects that the EPA, in scouring the health literature, has found. And you can see them here. The big one is respiratory. Irritated airways, increased risk of asthma, these pieces, that anything that has to do with the lungs from breathing actually change lung function. But there's a lot of emerging evidence that there's IQ, learning deficits, cardiovascular, and other issues that are coming from this long-term or short-term exposure to NO2. Another one that we were concerned about when it comes to combustion devices like gas stoves in the home is carbon monoxide. This chart is just showing you what the traditional alarm thresholds that you may have in your home for carbon monoxide are. And then on the right, you can see what the health effects could be. So the main bottom line point of this is, you may have a health effect at a lower level of exposure than your carbon monoxide detector would go off. And this is particularly true for people who already have underlying heart problems. So although we are focusing a lot on carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide still is an issue that I think warrants some more attention. I talked about children as a susceptible population. Another key area is that we know lower income households and people of color may be at higher risk of exposure to gas stove pollution. There's a couple factors. I want to hit on a couple of them. Smaller unit size. So we know from both in-home studies and modeling that the smaller your unit, the more your concentrations can build up. And so for people living in smaller spaces, this is a concern. Additionally, there's this concept of occupant density. So the more people we have in a space breathing in polluted air, the higher your exposure level can be. We also see this ventilation piece is a little bit tricky, because in older homes, in some ways they're good because they can be leakier and have ventilation, so your indoor pollutants can go outside. But in other cases, it can be a problem. And then a really key one that I think is important, and I would love to see some more research on, is this using your stove and your oven for supplemental heat. And this is associated with extreme poverty in some cases, and it's actually more common than I think many of us, or I could speak for myself, realize in the country. We have some studies in Baltimore and others, New York City, about people who are opening the oven in the evenings, maybe sometimes all day, all night, for another source of heat. And that can lead to, again, invisible, odorless buildup of really elevated pollution levels. So I think this is a key reason to address this issue. We also know that some of the folks who are most susceptible to gas stove pollution are those who have already had high exposures to outdoor pollution, or those who already have underlying respiratory effects like asthma. And since we know that lower income people and people of color are disproportionately affected by asthma, this becomes a concern, and I think also sheds a light on some areas where we should be targeting interventions. The good news is that we know that transitioning to electric options can yield health benefits. So this is just to give you an anecdote from a study. This was actually in Boston that found that when people moved into green housing from traditional public housing, they actually saw a decrease in NO2 levels by 65%, which they think that is supported by changing out gas to electric stoves. This is where I'd love to see more studies on the stove switching, but I think this is really promising. And some of the other randomized trials that we have seen where gas stoves have been switched out for electric have shown significant reductions in NO2 and health improvements. So I think for many of us, I would say myself included, I did not realize how bad gas stove pollution was. Although the literature has been around for a long time, it hasn't been in the public domain in an accessible way. So we did want to make sure we could give some things that we could do right now to reduce exposure. So the most simple is to cook on the back burners if you have them, and if you have a range hood or an exhaust hood to use that. We are big proponents of ventilation. As I said before, even cooking food will produce pollutants, but there's a couple problems with ventilation and why we don't think it's a sole strategy for health effect mitigation. And the main one is that not everyone has ventilation. The gas stove is one of the only gas devices that does not have to be required in every state to be vented, which is a little bit shocking because you're probably not standing in front of your water heater or your furnace every day, but you are in your gas stove. And so this was an interesting finding. It's state specific. And so we are big proponents on ventilation that goes to the outdoors. I myself have a recirculating range hood, a microwave that goes on top of my stove that sort of recirculates pollutants into just the top part of my kitchen. But even if you have that using the exhaust hood, we know from studies that sometimes less than 30 to 40% of people use their range hood. So even if you have it, if it's not perfect, it's something. And why did I say cook on the back burners? We know from studies, primarily from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, that the capture efficiency or the ability to pull pollutants up from the breathing space is better on the back burners. You can also open a window while cooking. We got to work with a researcher from Yale who said even opening a window for 5 minutes can make a big improvement. And then finally, this is what a lot of us at RMI, particularly the folks who are in our New York City office, have done during quarantine, which is to purchase a plug-in induction stove. There's a couple models for about $50 on Amazon. So just getting your feet wet with induction, which is an electric way to cook, but using magnets. And then finally, the best case is to remove the source of the combustion pollutants or the gas pollutants, which are the NO2 and the CO, and switch to electric and induction. This is key because we know that this is expensive and not an option for anyone. And I think there are some really smart people working on ways that we can make this a better option for all, particularly as we know that the health risk of gas stove pollution is not evenly shared. Really, this is a section for policymakers and where we think we can start to see some big movement on this. How do we bring in the public health arguments with the energy efficiency and the building code folks? So these are a few of the recommendations we've come up with that we're actively working on. Number one, let's have an indoor air quality guideline. Our indoor air is not regulated in this country. We do have some guidelines like in California, but they haven't been updated since 1994. So we're pushing hard right now in California with the California Energy Commission and the Air Resources Board to start addressing this. I think 2020, the year of stay at home, the year of wildfires, all of us spending more time. I think it's really illuminating how important our indoor air is and that we really can't take air quality indoors or outdoors for granted. Without guidelines, it makes it very hard to create building codes that best protect people. Also, a lot of us don't know about these risks, so warning labels on stoves. And then incentives, public funds, landlords, this is all how do we make sure we can have clean cooking options for the people who need them the most. So we have more detailed recommendations in the report, but these are a couple high levels. So this report, to be honest, we weren't sure how it was going to be received. RMI is not a health organization. It was in the middle of COVID, and when we put the report out, we were honestly astounded. It is the #1 visited RMI landing page this year. A lot of different media hits. Thanks, I think that was Sean. A lot of downloads, maybe some of you, so thank you. But I think what this is showing is that this topic has struck a chord, and I think there's a couple elements of this. One, people have emotional feelings to the gas stove, which is a key element of decarbonization that we have to address. We can't hit our climate goals if we're not also getting the gas stove piece addressed. And it's also the health issues I think were really shocking to a lot of people. And I have to say, I'm getting emails all the time from policymakers asking, and utilities asking how they can help make a difference. And so the different news sites on here, I think you can see there was a wide range, a wide spectrum of different elements. And I see that I have to update this slide, but we've now at least briefed almost 500 different people on webinars. So we're helping to spread this message and in the hopes that awareness can lead to action.
You've got 90 right now.
Yes, okay, I have to update this slide after.
And hey, on the topic of media, Suzanne Emerson wanted to know, do you have or might you make a less than 2-minute video or audio recording that we could play during the public comment section of city council meetings on REACH codes?
Oh, that's a great idea.
Could you do this in 2 minutes or less?
I think so. Well, I just did a podcast that will be on NPR that was 90 seconds. So I think 2 minutes we can get there. So love to chat with you.
If that exists, put a link in the chat comments, because that's yeah, there you go.
Okay.
And in about 9 minutes, your presentation's over, and you can also respond in the chats there because there's a whole bunch of them for you.
Okay, well, I'm almost done, so I'll try to save a couple minutes. So like I said, I have you captive, so let me say a couple words on outdoor building pollution and health effects. This slide is a good news, bad news slide. So good news, emissions outdoors has been decreasing 74% in the last 50 years, so that's a big win. Here's the bad news. Exposure to air pollution is now our greatest environmental health risk factor for early death in the US. So 100 to 200,000 people, that's more than car crashes and murders combined. And half of those are attributable to fossil fuel combustion. So I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but I think like really framing this as a health issue and air pollution is by and large preventable. This is something we can do something about. Buildings are a great way to address this because they're a significant source of the nitrogen oxides, which is really just nitric oxide and nitrogen dioxide. So a little family of two, which are toxic and dangerous on their own. But when emitted outside, when they hit the sunlight and heat, they also can become ozone and secondary particulate matter. So to me, I'm just becoming laser focused on this nitrogen oxide. I think it's a great way we can do something at this source. And here's my last slide. This is just a new study that was released yesterday. So researchers from Emory University they did a huge peer-reviewed study on COVID-19 linkage. You probably heard some of this air pollution and COVID-19, but the pollutant that had the strongest correlation with early death was nitrogen dioxide, more than ozone, more than particulate matter. Traffic, car emissions is the largest source of this pollution, but buildings are right behind that, and power plants are now lagging in third. And so I think the message here, we wrote a blog about it today to talk about what are the role of buildings. And I think the focus is just here. We are going to be hearing a lot more about nitrogen dioxide, and buildings are a great way that we can get rid of it inside our home and outside our home with the ultimate goal of achieving our climate and health goals.
want to point out that's an update of Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. You saw, because you were doing the critique, right? How they were using PM 2.5 as the highest concern, and they're like, well, that's emitted by both types of cooking, and so this important. This just came out yesterday, you say? This
This
is
just came out yesterday, and what the findings were so significant. They said a 4.6 parts per billion decrease in nitrogen dioxide long-term exposure. 4.6 is not much, would have saved almost 15,000 lives. So it's like real lives that could be saved if we start now and prevent this. So really small changes in long-term exposures, I think, will have significant health effects, benefits.
Thank you for bringing that forward. Yay! Woo! Okay, you got questions over there. To presenter Brady Seal, Glayal Saba, but your question hasn't come through, so I'll wait. Let's see here. Suzanne Emerson wants to know, how do we get the Air Board or the BWAQMD to publicly support REACH codes and other policies? You want to try that?
Sure. We have been briefing CARB board members, CARB staff on this issue. We see them as a key ally in this to acknowledge buildings and to start to do something about this. We are trying to get on the agenda for a future CARB board meeting, and I think that would be a great way where you could come out and show some public support and give them some reasons why the public is looking for this.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if this is the number one topic that you do so much. That's the number one. That's so impressive. Let's see here. Alice Sung wanted to know, do you know about the NOx levels from gas furnaces and classroom closets? Do you know where she might be able to find that data? Alice is working hard on decarbonizing schools, so her questions usually come from that perspective.
Yes, hi Alice. Great to talk to you. I know I just sent you an email. We are looking at this question. There are some great studies in the UK and Australia that have looked at unvented gas heaters, and we are trying to collect information and do a study on that, which will look similar, hopefully, to the gas stoves report. So I'd love to connect with you and let you know what we found out and where we still have some gaps.
So Tom Cabot has a couple funny comments. He usually is ironic. This one here, electric cooking retrofits into asthma households would also reduce the high global warming potential emissions of so many asthma inhalers. I get an insurance premium discount for not being a smoker. Can you convince insurers to offer premium discounts for electric cooking? I don't know if you've thought about it, you probably have, what the health insurance companies have to say on electric versus gas cooking now that we know it's so closely tied to asthma.
Yeah, I think this is great. I think that's a top priority for us. I do believe one of the things that's missing is we don't have a lot of studies yet about stove switching. And so I think just if we had a couple more studies which actually measured results in kids with asthma, if they had a gas stove and switched out to electric, would allow us to help quantify those health savings and make it easier for an insurance kind of company. So that's one of our recommendations for researchers and folks looking for new studies. I think that would fill a gap that would really help us start to monetize some of these health benefits.
Yeah, for those of you out there who are involved in California policymaking, the Low-Income Weatherization Program, which is funded through Cap and Trade, they go in and they do electrification retrofits. And those are already happening as projects. You don't have to push more millions of dollars to make this happen. It's happening. So we just need some monitoring, which would be very important. They already do a lot of energy and water monitoring to show the impacts of decarbonizing. So just putting that out there, that's a place where for years now we've been putting a lot of money. So there's another question here. Joe McCluskey wants to know, would an air purifier remove nitrogen dioxide? Mine shows a ppm for 2.5 PM particles.
Yes, some of them do. If you have a HEPA version, we really struggled going back and forth about, do we include air purifiers as one of our recommendations. One of the challenges we found is that they don't work well for carbon monoxide, but we do have Crystal Pollitt, who's from Yale, who's fantastic. She's developed a wearable NO2 sensor, and she's a big proponent of using air purifiers for NO2, and she wrote an article in Medium that gives some links, so I can follow up with that afterwards on that
Stick it in
topic.
the chat.
Yes.
That'd be great. Let me get on. Still have one more minute here. Many people are praising this. They love what you're doing here. Let's see. Kyoko Habinos, yeah, she says, how can we know when you need public support for the air quality management district and CARB meetings? How can we help? So she wants, maybe you could put your contact information into the chat so that people will know how to get a hold of you, since you are an organizer, activist on this, as well as a scientist.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, please send me an email, and I'd love to keep you posted on our list when we have public comment. We have if anyone wants to make a comment on the 30th at the California Energy Commission workshop on indoor air quality, we would love it. We are going to push for better ventilation. The gas industry is also showing up in full force, so it's sure to be a fun event for all.
Whee! Last question. We saw in an earlier presentation today that restaurants are a predominant natural gas user among the commercial sector for their stoves and ovens. Has RMI done any work on this topic with restaurants? So do you have data on indoor air pollution from restaurants, which do have code required serious hoods, distinct from the depravity of the residential market?
We haven't done any ourselves, but I think it's a really critical topic and one that's been coming up a lot. The California Building Decarbonization Group has a kitchen sub working group, and that's one of the topics that I've seen there. So I do just want to flag that. I think that's really important. We haven't done enough yet, but I think we will hopefully have some in the future.
Yay! Woo! Thank you, Brady.
Thanks, Sean.